At precisely 4:47 in the pre-dawn chill of May 11, 1945, Private John McKinney rested in his tent near Dingalan Bay, Luzon. Unbeknownst to him, approximately 100 Japanese soldiers were stealthily advancing through the dense jungle, their sights set on his location. At 24 years of age, with 2.5 years of military service under his belt, McKinney was the son of a sharecropper from Georgia, his formal education limited to the 3rd grade. By May of 1945, the arduous Philippine campaign had already inflicted over 60,000 casualties upon the United States. Japanese forces occupying Luzon stubbornly refused to capitulate. Instead, they resorted to relentless night assaults, audacious dawn raids, and desperate suicidal charges against American defensive lines. Company A of the 123rd Infantry Regiment, part of the 33rd Infantry Division, had established a forward position on the outskirts of Dingalan Bay in Tayabas Province. This strategic outpost was crucial for safeguarding a vital supply artery. 3 American soldiers were tasked with manning a light machine gun on the perimeter. McKinney had just completed a taxing rotation operating this very weapon. He ambled a short distance to his tent, laying down with his trusty M1 rifle resting beside him. The jungle at that moment was unnervingly tranquil. The Japanese were fully aware of the outpost's existence, having meticulously observed it for days. They had been counting the American defenders, timing their guard changes, and meticulously planning their imminent offensive. The attacking force moved in the cover of darkness, comprising over 100 soldiers drawn from the remnants of Japanese units still engaged in combat on Luzon. Their arsenal included rifles, grenades, knee mortars, and sharp swords. Their objective was brutally straightforward: overwhelm the American position, eliminate all defenders, and seize the vital supplies. The vanguard of the assault force silently infiltrated past the outer guard post, completely undetected. Sergeant Fukutaro Mori, leading the spearhead, had received explicit orders to neutralize the initial American sentries with absolute silence. The directive was clear: no gunfire, only the swift, deadly application of swords and bayonets. By the time the main body of the assault force launched their primary attack, the perimeter would already be irrevocably compromised. Mori reached McKinney's tent. He could discern the sound of the American soldiers' quiet breathing within. A single decisive strike would suffice to end this man's life before he could raise any alarm. McKinney's upbringing had been rooted in the hunting traditions of the Georgia woodlands. His father, a sharecropper in Scranton County, had struggled to provide for the family, which possessed little material wealth. John had learned the art of shooting long before he mastered reading. By the age of 12, he could accurately dispatch a squirrel at 50 yards with a .22 caliber rifle. He had also become adept at trapping rabbits and hunting deer. Fishing and hunting were essential activities that put food on the family's table, especially when the crops failed to yield. He had enlisted in the Army at Fort McPherson in November of 1942. The Army quickly discovered his rudimentary literacy and numeracy skills. However, they also recognized him as one of the most exceptional marksmen they had ever encountered. His qualification scores were nothing short of extraordinary. Drill sergeants took note of his preternatural ability to navigate wooded terrain, moving with a quiet awareness that set him apart from his fellow soldiers. He had spent his entire formative life in environments where a single lapse in vigilance could mean the difference between sustenance and starvation. The 33rd Infantry Division was deployed to the Pacific Theater in 1943. McKinney fought his way through New Guinea, enduring the unforgiving jungle, surviving encounters with Japanese soldiers, and battling the debilitating effects of malaria and dysentery. along with every other hardship the Pacific Theater relentlessly inflicted upon American troops. By May of 1945, he had become a seasoned veteran, a man of few words who kept to himself, diligently performed his duties without complaint. His comrades knew two defining things about John McKeany. He was unequivocally the finest shot in the entire company, and he never slept without his rifle close at hand. That very rifle was about to become the instrument of his survival. Sergeant Maury flung open the tent flap at 4:51. The sword descended in a swift, diagonal arc, aimed directly at McKeany's neck. In the oppressive darkness, Maury misjudged the distance. The razor-sharp blade instead connected with the side of McKeany's head, severing a portion of his right ear. Blood spurted across the tent canvas. McKeany's eyes snapped open, greeted by searing pain and the stark silhouette of a figure standing over him, sword raised high. He had less than a single second to react. Maury was already bringing the blade down for a second, fatal strike, one that would not miss. McKeany's hand instinctively found his rifle in the darkness. He didn't aim. He didn't think. 24 years of ingrained survival instinct took immediate command. He swung his M1 rifle like a formidable club. The rifle's butt struck Maury squarely under the chin with enough concussive force to shatter bone. The Japanese sergeant staggered backward. McKeany swung again. The second blow landed with devastating impact, crushing Maury's skull. Outside the tent, McKeany could hear them. The unmistakable sound of rapid footsteps. Dozens of them, moving swiftly through the camp. The main Japanese assault had commenced. He was bleeding profusely from his ear, his head throbbing from the sword strike. And somewhere in the encroaching darkness, nearly 100 Japanese soldiers were advancing with the sole intent of slaughtering everyone he knew. McKeany snatched up his rifle and lunged out of the tent. The scene that greeted him sent a chilling wave of dread through his body. The vital machine gun nest was a mere 30 yards from his tent. 3 American soldiers had been manning it when he retired. Now, he could discern the ominous muzzle flashes piercing the darkness, the terrified screams, and the sharp crack of Arisaka rifles intermingling with the heavier reports of M1 Garands. Japanese soldiers were flooding the perimeter from the northeast, advancing in relentless waves. The initial wave had already reached the machine gun emplacement. McKeany could see figures struggling violently in the shadows surrounding the gun pit. His mind rapidly processed the unfolding tactical crisis within mere seconds. The machine gun was the linchpin of the entire defensive position, providing crucial coverage of the primary approach to the American encampment. If the Japanese managed to capture it and reorient its fire, they could devastate the entire perimeter. Every man in Company A would face certain annihilation. McKeany sprinted directly toward the gun. The 2 soldiers who had relieved him at the machine gun were engaged in a desperate fight for their lives. Private James Hricks had sustained a bayonet wound to his shoulder during the initial seconds of the onslaught. The third man, witnessing Hendricks go down, made a swift, critical decision. He grabbed his wounded comrade and dragged him towards the rear of the perimeter. It was a sound, tactical choice. Hendricks would have succumbed to his injuries if left behind. However, this act of valor left the machine gun completely undefended. 10 Japanese infantrymen swarmed the emplacement before McKeany could reach it. They clambered over the sandbag barricade. One soldier immediately began attempting to reposition the machine gun. The others formed a defensive perimeter, their rifles pointed outward, vigilant for any sign of American counterattack. McKeany did not hesitate. He did not slow his pace. He eschewed taking cover, ignored the absence of backup. He sprinted directly at 10 enemy soldiers who had just secured the most critical weapon in the entire outpost. The Japanese soldiers spotted his approach. A lone American, bleeding from a head wound, charging headlong at them in the pre-dawn gloom. Two of them raised their rifles. McKinney was faster. He fired, hitting the first man at a distance of 15 yards. The report of his M1 echoed across the camp. He fired again, striking the second man at 10 yards. By the time he reached the sandbag wall, he had expended 4 rounds. 4 Japanese soldiers lay dead. He leaped into the emplacement. The confined space measured roughly 8 feet by 6 feet. 6 enemy soldiers remained alive within this cramped area. Some struggled to bring their rifles to bear, while others reached for their bayonets. One man was still fumbling with the machine gun's traversing mechanism. McKinney landed amidst them, continuing his relentless fire at point-blank range. The M1 Garand held 8 rounds in its internal magazine. He had already fired 4. He directed the next 3 rounds into 3 more Japanese soldiers at distances measured in inches rather than yards. 1 round remained. The 8th man stood directly before him, bayonet raised for a thrust at McKinney's chest. McKinney fired his last round. The soldier crumpled. The M1 Garand's bolt locked back on an empty magazine with its distinctive metallic ping. 3 Japanese soldiers were still alive within the gun pit. They had heard that sound. They understood its dire implication. McKinney reversed his grip on the rifle before the empty clip had finished ejecting. He swung the weapon like a brutal axe. The solid walnut stock connected with the first soldier's temple. The man collapsed. McKinney swung again. The second soldier attempted to block the blow with his forearm. The rifle butt shattered bone and continued its trajectory into the soldier's skull. The third soldier lunged forward with a bayonet. McKinney sidestepped the thrust and brought the rifle down with crushing force on the back of the man's neck. The vertebrae audibly cracked. 10 Japanese soldiers had successfully captured the machine gun. 30 seconds later, all 10 lay dead. McKinney reached for the machine gun. His hands closed around the receiver. Something was critically wrong. During the violent struggle, the weapon had been severely damaged. The bolt was jammed, and the feed tray was severely bent. He cycled the charging handle twice. Nothing happened. The gun was inoperable. The most vital weapon in the perimeter was now rendered useless. McKinney looked up from the damaged machine gun. Dawn was beginning to paint the eastern horizon with faint light, and in that nascent gray glow, he could see them. More Japanese soldiers. Many more. They were regrouping at the edge of the jungle, preparing for their next assault. He held an M1 rifle with an empty magazine. He had just eliminated 10 enemy combatants in brutal hand-to-hand combat. His ear continued to bleed, and the main assault had yet to truly begin. McKinney reached down and retrieved a bandolier of ammunition from one of the fallen Japanese soldiers. These were American .30 caliber rounds, likely scavenged from a previous engagement. McKinney swiftly loaded a fresh clip into his rifle. Somewhere in the darkness, a Japanese officer was bellowing orders. McKinney couldn't comprehend the words, but he understood the urgent tone. They were coming again. He settled into the gun pit, surrounded by the bodies of the men he had just dispatched, rested his rifle on the sandbag wall, and waited. The second wave emerged from the jungle approximately 60 yards away. McKinney counted at least 20 soldiers in the leading line, with more following behind them. They advanced at a run, rifles with fixed bayonets extended, letting out war cries as they charged. McKinney placed his front sight on the lead soldier and squeezed the trigger. The M1 Garand was engineered for rapid, semi-automatic fire. A proficient soldier could deliver 8 aimed shots in under 10 seconds. McKinney, however, was no mere trained soldier. He was a lifelong hunter from Georgia, a marksman since his childhood. He was faster. The first Japanese soldier fell at 60 yards. McKinney shifted his aim. The second man dropped, then the third. The M1 kicked against his shoulder with each subsequent shot. Brass casings ejected to his right. He wasn't thinking about his actions. His body was operating on muscle memory honed by thousands of hours spent in the Georgia woods. Lead the target, squeeze the trigger, acquire the next target, repeat. The clip ejected with its familiar ping. McKinney slammed in a fresh one from the bandolier. The charging wave had covered 20 yards during his reload, now 40 yards away. He resumed firing. The Japanese soldiers in the second wave had anticipated finding a captured machine gun position. They had expected their comrades to be turning that very weapon upon the unsuspecting Americans. Instead, they were met by a single rifleman, systematically cutting them down with unnerving, mechanical precision. 8 rounds. Reload. 8 rounds. Reload. Some of the attackers managed to reach within 15 yards of the gun pit before McKinney dropped them. Others attempted to veer left or right, seeking available cover. He tracked their movements and fired. A moving target, he had learned from hunting deer, was easier to hit than one that remained stationary. The second wave faltered and broke. The survivors scattered back towards the jungle's embrace. McKinney surveyed the carnage before his position, counting the fallen. 11 more, bringing his total to 21 enemy dead since the attack began. He had no time to savor any sense of relief. Japanese officers were already reorganizing their forces. He could hear their commands echoing from beyond the tree line. And then, he heard something new, a distinct, hollow thud from somewhere within the jungle, followed by another. Knee mortars. The first round detonated 10 yards to his left, showering the gun pit with dirt and shrapnel. McKinney flattened himself against the sandbags. The second round landed closer. The third struck the parapet directly, showering him with debris. The Japanese had clearly learned from their initial assaults. They wouldn't charge blindly into his rifle fire again. Their strategy was now to soften the position with mortars, eliminate him, or at least force him to keep his head down before sending in their infantry. McKinney grasped the tactical dilemma immediately. Remaining in the gun pit meant eventual death from the mortars, as the Japanese gunners were expertly adjusting their aim with each shot, bringing it closer. But if he moved, he would forfeit the only fortified position in this section of the perimeter. A grenade landed a mere 3 feet away. McKinney snatched it up and hurled it back over the sandbags. It exploded in midair, the concussive blast wave knocking him sideways. His ears were ringing intensely. Blood from his severed ear had saturated the makeshift bandage he had pressed against the wound. Another mortar round impacted the sandbags directly, causing the wall to partially collapse. McKinney was now significantly exposed to the jungle. He made his decision. Remaining meant certain demise. He grabbed 2 bandoliers of ammunition from the fallen soldiers nearby, slung them over his shoulder, and ran. The Japanese spotted his movement. Rifle fire erupted from the tree line. Bullets snapped past his head. McKinney sprinted 15 yards to a shallow depression in the ground. Not a true foxhole, but a slight natural dip in the terrain. He threw himself into it and rolled onto his back. Rounds kicked up dirt mere inches from his face. He crawled to the edge of the depression, finding a suitable firing position. The Japanese infantry was advancing once more, believing he was fleeing. They thought he was retreating. 2 squads emerged from the jungle at a brisk walk, rifles at the ready, moving towards the abandoned gun pit. McKinney allowed them to advance to within 30 yards. Then, he opened fire. The attackers had bunched together while crossing the open ground, a fatal mistake. McKinney's first shot dropped the point man. His second hit the soldier directly behind him. The group scattered, but there was no cover between the jungle and McKinney's new position. He systematically picked them off as they ran. 8 rounds, reload. The survivors reached the gun pit, only to find it empty, filled instead with the bodies of their comrades from the initial wave. They had expected to confront the American there. Instead, they found him engaging them from an entirely unexpected angle. 3 more fell before they could pinpoint his muzzle flash. McKinney changed position again, moving 10 yards to his right while the Japanese attempted to regroup. He located another depression and commenced firing from this new vantage point. He was operating with the same instinct he had employed in the Georgia woods. Never remain stationary. Never allow your target to anticipate the source of the next shot. A deer that hears 1 gunshot might freeze, but a deer that hears 2 from different locations will panic and run in circles. The Japanese soldiers were, in effect, running in circles. The dawn light was steadily spreading across the sky. McKinney had been engaged in combat for 18 minutes. His ammunition was dwindling. His ear continued to bleed, and he could observe movement in the jungle suggesting the enemy was massing for another significant offensive. He desperately needed more ammunition, and he knew precisely where to obtain it. The deceased Japanese soldiers scattered around the gun pit carried ammunition. Not just the .30 caliber rounds he had already scavenged, but some possessed Arisaka rifles with full ammunition pouches, and others had grenades clipped to their belts. McKinney had to return to that site. He waited for a brief lull in the mortar fire, counted to 3, then sprinted across the open ground towards the gun pit. Rifle fire erupted from the tree line. McKinney ran in a zigzag pattern. A bullet tugged at his sleeve. Another cracked past his ear. He dove the final 5 feet, landing amidst the bodies he had created 20 minutes prior. The stench hit him immediately. Blood, cordite, and something else. The metallic tang of death. McKinney ignored it. He had butchered hogs on the farm and gutted deer in the Georgia heat. The smell of death was a familiar one. He moved swiftly among the fallen, gathering every bandolier he could find, every loose clip. He discovered 4 American ammunition pouches on men who had likely acquired them as trophies. This provided him with 64 additional rounds. He stuffed the clips into his pockets and belt. A Japanese soldier suddenly appeared over the sandbag wall. He must have crawled forward while McKinney was busy gathering ammunition. The man's rifle was already coming up. McKinney shot him through the chest at a distance of 2 feet. He then seized the dead man's grenades, 3 of them. Japanese Type 97 fragmentation grenades. He had never used one before, but he recognized them and understood their basic operation. Pull the pin, strike the cap against a hard surface, count to 4, and throw. Movement in his peripheral vision. More soldiers were approaching from the left. McKinney armed a grenade, counted, and hurled it over the sandbags. The explosion was followed by screams. He armed the second grenade and threw it towards the tree line where muzzle flashes were concentrated. More screams ensued. He was already out of the gun pit before the third grenade left his hand. Running again, seeking a new position. Keep moving. The sky was now light enough to see clearly. McKinney found a shell crater approximately 15 yards from his previous depression. He dropped into it. The crater was 3 feet deep, offering sufficient cover from direct fire. He could now see the entire approach from the jungle to the perimeter. Bodies littered the ground between his position and the trees. He counted quickly. 28, perhaps 30. Some were still moving, wounded men attempting to crawl back towards their lines. McKinney allowed them to go. A wounded soldier required 2 able-bodied soldiers to carry him. Every casualty he inflicted multiplied the enemy's logistical problems. The mortar fire had ceased. McKinney understood why. The Japanese had lost visual contact with him. Their mortar crews could not adjust their fire on a target they could not see. He estimated he had approximately 15 to 20 minutes before they repositioned their observers. He utilized this time to reload every empty clip he carried. His fingers worked automatically, pressing the rounds into the clip, feeling the tension of the spring. 8 rounds per clip. He had scavenged enough ammunition for approximately 10 reloads, totaling 80 rounds. 80 rounds against however many Japanese soldiers remained in that jungle. The attack had now been ongoing for 23 minutes. McKinney had eliminated or wounded at least 30 enemy soldiers, but he understood the grim mathematics were not in his favor. The Japanese had initiated the assault with roughly 100 men. Even if half of them were incapacitated, that still left 50, and he was utterly alone. Where were the remaining soldiers of Company A? The answer was complex. The Japanese attack had struck multiple points along the perimeter simultaneously. McKinney's position was on the northeast flank. Other soldiers were engaged in their own desperate battles on the southern and western sectors of the camp. The company commander was attempting to organize a cohesive defense. However, in the disorienting darkness and chaos of a night assault, effective coordination proved nearly impossible. McKinney was unaware of these realities. He knew only that no reinforcements had arrived. No supporting fire had materialized, leaving him isolated with his rifle and the accumulating corpses before his position. The Japanese forces regrouped at the edge of the jungle. McKinney could see them through the trees, soldiers inspecting their weapons, non-commissioned officers moving amongst the ranks, and officers studying the American perimeter through binoculars. They had anticipated overrunning this outpost within 5 minutes. They had lost nearly a third of their strength to a single man in 23 minutes, and they still had not achieved a breakthrough. The Japanese officer lowered his binoculars. McKinney observed him, gesturing towards a specific section of the perimeter. Not the gun pit, not the craters where McKinney had been fighting, but the supply tents. A different approach, a new axis of attack designed to bypass the deadly killing ground McKinney had established. McKinney instantly comprehended the enemy's intention. They were planning to flank his position, assault the camp from a direction he could not cover, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to prevent it from his current location. He faced a critical choice: remain in his crater, where he possessed cover and clear fields of fire, or move to intercept an attack he might not reach in time. McKinney climbed out of the crater and began running towards the supply tents. The supply tents were 40 yards from his crater. McKinney covered that distance in 8 seconds. He threw himself behind a stack of ammunition crates just as the first Japanese soldiers emerged from the jungle on the southern approach. They had not anticipated his presence there. A vanguard of 12 soldiers advanced in a disciplined formation, their objective a narrow passage between 2 canvas shelters. Emerging from that opening would place them within the American lines, granting unobstructed firing lanes toward enemy combatants engaged elsewhere along the defensive front. From his concealed position behind stacked crates, McKinney opened fire. The initial 3 men in the advancing column fell before their comrades could comprehend the threat. The 4th and 5th soldiers attempted to return the assault, but the deep shadows between the tents obscured the source of the barrage. McKinney eliminated them both. The remaining 7 soldiers fractured, some retreating towards the dense jungle, while others sought refuge behind fallen timbers and shallow depressions in the terrain. McKinney focused his attention on those who had taken cover. They were effectively immobilized, unable to advance without exposing themselves, nor able to withdraw safely. He then shifted his gaze towards the tree line. Additional enemy combatants were appearing. The Japanese commander had deployed his reserve forces for this maneuver, aimed at outflanking the American position. Approximately 20, perhaps 25, more men emerged. Witnessing their comrades pinned down, they faltered at the edge of the jungle. This hesitation proved costly. McKinney unleashed a barrage into the clustered soldiers, expending 8 rounds before swiftly reloading and firing another 8. Bodies dropped amongst the trees, and the surviving attackers retreated into deeper foliage. 26 minutes into the engagement, McKinney had inflicted casualties upon at least 35 enemy soldiers, either killing or wounding them. The Japanese had attempted 3 distinct strategies: a direct assault on the machine gun emplacement, a mortar bombardment, followed by an infantry push, and the flanking maneuver toward the supply depot. All 3 had met with failure. The Japanese commander was confronted with a situation entirely outside his prior experience. His intelligence had indicated this outpost was held by a small contingent of American troops possessing limited heavy weaponry. Standard military doctrine dictated overwhelming night assaults against such targets, where speed and superior numbers would negate any defensive advantages. However, a single individual had completely disrupted this plan. The commander was unaware of the singular nature of the defense. His soldiers reported intense gunfire originating from multiple locations, describing muzzle flashes observed first from the gun pit, then from a position 30 yards distant, and subsequently from behind the supply crates. This led to the erroneous conclusion that the Americans had established interlocking fields of fire, with several riflemen providing mutual support. This misinterpretation, however, would profoundly influence Japanese tactics for the ensuing phase of the conflict. The mortar crews relocated to the southwest, initiating a bombardment of the supply area. Upon hearing the initial impacts, McKinney moved with urgency. He had learned that static positions became prime targets for mortar fire. Movement was paramount for survival. He ran north along the interior of the defensive perimeter, discovering an abandoned foxhole, its occupant having gone to reinforce the southern defenses. He descended into it. This emplacement was deeper than his previous positions, extending 4 feet below ground level and featuring a firing step that allowed him to peer over the lip. The Japanese infantry launched another assault, this time converging from 2 directions simultaneously. One group from the south and another from the original northeastern approach. Their objective was to divide his firepower, forcing him to choose which advance to prioritize. McKinney engaged both. He fired 4 rounds at the southern contingent, neutralizing 2 men, then swiftly swung his rifle northeast, discharging 4 more rounds at that group, eliminating 2 additional adversaries. His M1 rifle's distinctive ping signaled an empty magazine. He reloaded in under 3 seconds and resumed firing at the southern force. The assault faltered. Neither group could press their advance against the relentless rifle fire, nor could they safely withdraw. They took cover and began to return fire. Bullets whizzed over McKinney's head, and rounds thudded into the earth surrounding his foxhole. He was now under fire from 2 separate directions. His ammunition supply was dwindling. Moreover, the Japanese were adapting. They had deduced that the intense fire emanated from a singular source, not a coordinated defense of multiple riflemen. It was one man, moving with exceptional speed and accuracy. This realization dramatically altered the battle's trajectory. The Japanese soldiers ceased their wave assaults and began to advance individually. One soldier would move forward while others provided suppressive fire. Then another would advance, leapfrogging, gradually closing the distance yard by yard. This tactic was specifically designed to overwhelm a solitary defender. Even the most skilled marksman would struggle to track multiple targets advancing at different times from varying directions. Eventually, one would reach a dangerously close range. McKinney recognized the pattern, having observed similar tactics employed by predators in nature. A pack of coyotes, for instance, would spread out and approach prey from multiple angles, forcing the prey to focus on one immediate threat while the others closed in. He now found himself in the role of the prey. 31 minutes had elapsed. The Japanese had advanced to within 20 yards on the southern approach and 15 yards on the northeast. McKinney possessed fewer than 30 rounds remaining. The foxhole that had offered him protection was on the verge of becoming his final resting place. McKinney did not wait for them to reach his position. He erupted from the foxhole and charged directly at the nearest cluster of Japanese soldiers. 5 men were crouched behind a toppled palm tree, approximately 15 yards to the northeast. They had been anticipating their comrades' advance from the opposite direction and were taken completely by surprise by his direct assault. McKinney fired as he ran, striking the first soldier. He shot the second as he reached the fallen log. The third soldier rose to meet him, lunging with a bayonet. McKinney sidestepped and forcefully struck the man's face with the butt of his rifle. A sickening crunch of bone was audible as the soldier collapsed. The fourth man swung his rifle like a club. McKinney ducked beneath the blow and drove the steel butt plate of his M1 into the soldier's throat. The fifth man attempted to flee. McKinney shot him in the back from a distance of 3 yards. He continued his relentless advance, unable to halt, as stopping meant certain death. The Southern contingent had observed his departure from the foxhole and were now sprinting toward his vacated position. McKinney spun around and fired. 2 men fell. The others pressed on. He fired again, and another soldier dropped. The M1 pinged, indicating an empty magazine. 3 Japanese soldiers reached him before he could complete a reload. The first tackled him around the waist, sending them both to the ground with a hard impact. His rifle was wrenched from his grasp. The second soldier stomped on his already wounded ear, sending an explosion of pain through his skull. The third raised his bayonet for a killing thrust. McKinney seized the ankle of the soldier standing over him and twisted violently. The soldier lost his balance and fell. McKinney rolled, dislodging the man who had tackled him. The bayonet thrust narrowly missed his chest, burying itself in the dirt. He scrambled to his knees, retrieved his rifle, and swung it in a wide arc, striking one soldier across the temple, causing him to collapse. McKinney reversed the swing, driving the butt plate into another soldier's ribs. He felt bones fracture under the impact. The third soldier had retrieved his bayonet from the ground and lunged. McKinney blocked the thrust with his rifle barrel. The blade scraped along the wood and steel, leaving a deep gouge in the stock. McKinney stepped inside the man's reach and headbutted him. The soldier staggered. McKinney struck him twice more with the rifle butt. The man ceased moving. 33 minutes had passed since the commencement of the attack. McKinney's breathing was labored. His hands were slick with blood, some of it his own. His ear was a mangled mess of torn flesh and dried gore. His uniform was ripped in numerous places. He bore bruises and cuts he had no recollection of sustaining. Yet, he remained alive. He surveyed the battlefield. Bodies were scattered everywhere. Japanese soldiers who had come to eliminate Americans had encountered something entirely unexpected. More bodies than he could count lay in the dim morning light. Movement to his right caught his attention. Two more soldiers emerged from the jungle. McKinney raised his rifle, only to realize it was empty. He had not reloaded after the close-quarters combat. The two soldiers spotted him standing amidst the fallen forms of their comrades. They hesitated. McKinney charged them. He covered 10 yards before they could react. The first soldier attempted to bring his rifle to bear. He was too slow. McKinney's rifle butt struck him under the chin. The second soldier turned to flee. McKinney pursued him for 3 strides and struck him from behind with his rifle. 34 minutes. The mortar position. McKinney recalled seeing muzzle flashes originating from the southwest. The knee mortars had relentlessly pounded his positions throughout the battle. Eliminating those crews would neutralize the indirect fire threat. He found a loaded rifle among the dead, an M1 with a full magazine. He picked it up, discarded his damaged weapon, and began moving toward the mortar emplacement. The mortar crews sighted him approaching. 2 men, who had been adjusting their weapon for another fire mission, now scrambled to defend themselves. One reached for a rifle, while the other attempted to arm a grenade. McKinney shot them both from a range of 45 yards. 35 minutes. He stood in the dawning light, scanning the jungle for further targets. His chest heaved, his vision blurred from exhaustion and blood loss. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest. The jungle had fallen silent. No more soldiers emerged from the trees. No more mortar rounds descended. No more rifle fire echoed from concealed positions. Only the moans of wounded men and the persistent buzz of flies already gathering on the deceased. McKinney walked back toward the American perimeter. He was halfway there when he saw figures advancing toward him. American uniforms, soldiers from Company A who had finally fought their way to his sector of the line. They stopped upon seeing him covered in blood, carrying a rifle that was not his own, surrounded by a tableau of death. McKinney lowered his weapon. The reinforcements stared at the carnage surrounding him, at the shattered machine gun nest, at the scattered corpses stretching from the jungle's edge to the perimeter fortifications. 36 minutes after Sergeant Fukutaro Mai had slashed open his tent, Private John McKinney remained standing, still breathing, and in complete command of the area. The battle had concluded, though its full scope and significance remained incomprehensible to those present. The soldiers who reached McKenna that morning belonged to the 2nd Platoon. They had been engaged in combat on the western flank of the perimeter when the Japanese offensive commenced. It took them precisely 36 minutes to break through to McKenna's position. What they encountered defied all logical understanding. Bodies lay strewn across an area approximately 100 yards in length and 60 yards in width. Japanese soldiers were slumped over sandbags, crumpled within shell craters, sprawled amongst the supply crates, and piled atop one another near the damaged machine gun emplacement. The platoon sergeant ordered a head count. His men moved across the battlefield, examining each body and marking their positions. This process consumed 20 minutes. Upon completion, the sergeant found the total unbelievable and ordered a recount. 38 Japanese soldiers lay dead in the immediate vicinity of the machine gun position. An additional 2 bodies were discovered near the mortar emplacement, situated 45 yards away. 40 confirmed fatalities were accounted for within a space that a single man had defended for 36 minutes. The sergeant located McKenna seated on an ammunition crate. The private was pressing a blood-soaked bandage against the remnants of his right ear. His uniform was tattered and stained. The stock of his rifle was cracked from repeated impacts against human skulls. He appeared as though he had traversed a personal inferno. The sergeant inquired about the events that had transpired. McKenna provided a concise account. The tent, the sword, the machine gun, the waves of attackers. He spoke in brief, factual sentences, devoid of embellishment or dramatic flair. The sergeant found it difficult to believe. He reasoned that no single soldier could account for 40 enemy deaths in 36 minutes. It was an impossibility. He assumed there must have been other defenders, other riflemen supporting McKinney's position. While the private was disoriented from blood loss and the intense combat stress, the other soldiers from Company A had been accounted for. The two men who had initially manned the machine gun with McKinney had been evacuated to the rear with injuries. All other personnel had been engaged on different sections of the perimeter. The physical evidence corroborated McKinney's account. Spent M1 casings were scattered across the ground at the exact locations he had described. The trajectories of the wounds on the Japanese bodies corresponded precisely with the firing angles from those positions. One man, 40 kills, 36 minutes. The commanding officer of Company A submitted a report to battalion headquarters. Battalion forwarded it to regiment, and regiment, in turn, transmitted it to division. At each echelon, officers perused the report, assuming it contained inflated casualty figures, a common occurrence in combat reporting, particularly from soldiers experiencing stress. The numbers, they concluded, must be inaccurate. The 33rd Infantry Division dispatched an intelligence team to verify the report. They interviewed McKinney, questioned witnesses, examined the battlefield, and recounted the bodies once more. While some accounts suggested the actual number of Japanese casualties exceeded 100, only 40 could be definitively attributed to McKinney's direct actions. The investigators arrived at an incontrovertible conclusion. The report was accurate. Private John McKinney had single-handedly repelled an attack by approximately 100 Japanese soldiers, killing 40 of them and saving his company from potential annihilation. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor was submitted in June of 1945. The Medal of Honor stands as the highest military decoration bestowed by the United States government, with fewer than 3,500 awarded since the Civil War. Its criteria are exacting. The recipient must have distinguished themselves conspicuously by gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of their life above and beyond the call of duty. McKinney's actions demonstrably surpassed these criteria by any reasonable standard. The recommendation progressed through official channels. War Department reviewers scrutinized the evidence, reaching the same conclusion as the division investigators. The account was truthful, with every detail substantiated by witness testimony and tangible evidence. On January 23, 1946, Private John McKinney stood in the White House, where President Harry Truman placed a Medal of Honor around his neck. The accompanying citation formally detailed his actions in military language, citing extreme gallantry, unsurpassed intrepidity, and the single-handed thwarting of an assault that threatened to annihilate his company. McKinney did not deliver speeches nor seek public acclaim. When approached by reporters regarding the battle, he offered the same brief explanations he had provided to the sergeant that morning on Luzon. The tent, the sword, the machine gun, the waves of attackers. The press dubbed him the Pacific's Audie Murphy, referencing Murphy's own Medal of Honor awarded for single-handedly repelling German forces in France. McKinney had accomplished a similar feat against Japanese forces in the Philippines. Both men had faced overwhelming odds, refused to retreat, and emerged victorious through a combination of skill, courage, and an intangible quality that defied easy explanation. However, While Murphy achieved cinematic stardom after the war, McKinney returned to Georgia. He was 25 years old, possessed a Medal of Honor, a third-grade education, and a partially severed ear that would never fully heal. The war was over. The killing had ceased. John McKinney faced the profound challenge of reintegrating into civilian life and rediscovering his identity as a civilian. John McKinney returned to Screven County, Georgia in 1946. He resumed the only life he knew, farming, hunting, and fishing in the same creeks where he had honed his shooting skills as a boy. He rarely spoke of the war. His neighbors were aware of his Medal of Honor, having seen the newspaper articles. But McKinney never initiated conversations about it, never displayed the medal, and never attended reunions or granted interviews. When queried about Luzon, he would offer a few brief remarks before changing the subject. The nightmares, however, were a different matter. His family bore witness to them, the sounds he made in his sleep, the way he would suddenly awaken, reaching for a rifle that was not there. The war had followed him home in ways no medal could assuage. Post-traumatic stress disorder was not a recognized diagnosis at the time. In 1946, soldiers struggling with combat memories were advised to put them aside, move forward, and be grateful for their survival. McKenna, like most veterans of his generation, buried his memories and continued to work. He married, raised a family, and held various jobs throughout Screven County. The years passed. The Korean War came and went, followed by Vietnam. New conflicts produced new heroes and new veterans grappling with their own buried memories. McKinney remained in Georgia, living a quiet life, aging quietly. The Medal of Honor resided in a drawer somewhere. He had earned the nation's highest military decoration, yet most of his neighbors remained unaware of this distinction. In 1965, author Forrest Bryant Johnson began researching McKinney's story. Johnson, a veteran himself, possessed an understanding of McKinney's experiences. He dedicated years to locating witnesses, examining military records, and painstakingly reconstructing the events of those 36 minutes on Luzon. The research proved arduous. McKinney was reluctant to speak, and many witnesses had passed away. Military records were dispersed across numerous archives, but Johnson persevered, believing the story deserved to be told. His book, Phantom Warrior, was published in 2007. It chronicled McKinney's childhood in Georgia, his service in the Pacific, and the pivotal battle that earned him the Medal of Honor. The book brought renewed attention to a hero unknown to most Americans. McKinney did not live to see its publication. He passed away on April 5, 1997, in Sylvania, Georgia, at the age of 76. The son of a sharecropper who had single-handedly neutralized 40 Japanese soldiers with a rifle and his bare hands, died peacefully, surrounded by family. He was interred in Screven County, not far from the land where he had learned to hunt. 20 years after his death, Georgia formally honored him again. In 2017, the state legislature voted to rename a section of highway in Screven County, designating it the John R. McKinney Medal of Honor Highway. A ceremony was held, attended by veterans. The McKinney family accepted the honor on behalf of a man who had never sought recognition for his extraordinary actions. The highway sign stands today, with drivers passing it unaware of the narrative behind the name. They do not know about the tent and the sword. They do not know about the machine gun and the 36 minutes. They do not know that the quiet farmer who once resided nearby had saved an entire company through an act of violence and courage that continues to defy comprehension. 40 men in 36 minutes. One rifle, one soldier, one morning in the Philippines, that should have concluded in a massacre, but instead resulted in something entirely different. Private John McKinney never sought to be a hero. He was a farm boy who enlisted in the army because a war was underway. He did what was necessary to survive and to protect the sleeping men around him. Subsequently, he returned home and attempted to lead a normal life. This is the narrative. This is his legacy. This is John McKinney. If this account has resonated with you as it has with us, please do us a favor and click the like button. Every single like signals to YouTube to show this story to more viewers. Please subscribe and enable notifications. We are dedicated to rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives on a daily basis. These are stories about farm boys and privates who saved lives with rifles and their bare hands. Real individuals, real heroism. Please leave a comment right now and tell us your viewing location. Are you watching from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia? Our community spans the entire globe. You are more than just a viewer. You are an integral part of keeping these memories alive. Please share your location. Let us know if someone in your family served. Simply indicate your presence. Thank you for watching, and thank you for ensuring that John McKinney does not fade into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are instrumental in making that happen.